This computer. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Deviant Mind. This is Dominika.
And this is Christopher.
And the month of October is literally my most favorite month of the entire year. I love Halloween. I love horror movies. And so we decided that we would do horror movies and the true
Yes.
cases that are connected to them or are they're based on. And today we decided an infamous one called the Amityville Horror, which for all of you young kids, if you haven't seen it, definitely do. It was done in 1979, and it was directed by Stuart Rosenberg, starring James Brolin, Margot Kidder, and Rod Steiger. And it was a film that follows a young couple who purchase a home haunted by combative supernatural forces. And it was based on Jay Anson's 1977 book of the same horror. And supposedly, the book documented the alleged, and we're going to get into this, paranormal experiences of the Lutz family who briefly resided in the Amityville, New York home. And this home was where Ronald DeFeo Jr. committed the mass murder of his family in 1974. And we are going to be talking about the case of Ronald Jr., what happened for him to kill his family, and then also how the lawyer, the lawyer orchestrated this entire series. Now, there's the Amityville Horror is the original movie, but it was remade in 2005. There's been sequels to it. It is actually at the time.
There's so many movies using the Amityville title, including I think I told Amityville in Space.
Right, exactly.
Amityville in Space. And the poster, as I said, is the Amityville house, but in outer space.
Yeah, which is, that's just amazing. And just for all of you youngsters, this is actually known as one of the highest grossing independent films of all time. And it grossed over $80 million in North America. And this was in 1979.
Yeah.
It was
at a very early age, my parents, and more specifically my mom, would bring me at a very early age to see horror films. But, it's kind of messed up, but it kind of grew into, my fascination with all this today. But for instance,
somewhere.
Got to start somewhere. Like my first movie was Burnt Offering. And it was just but anyways, I saw that my parents took me to see the Amityville Horror. So what they would do is they'd cover my eyes over scary scenes coming up, right? But I remember being like, whoa. And then when I found out that it was in New York, upstate New York, I was like, oh my God. So then you flash forward to when I'm a teen and my family are visiting my cousin, and we went past house, and it was just the weirdest thing to actually come face to face with the house, which in itself I find to be a character. I mean, it has eyes.
Oh, I know, right? And now to I believe Amityville isn't it on Long Island? Or am I wrong about that?
It's upstate New York, and it's about 17 miles away from New York City proper.
Okay. Yeah. So it must be in Westchester County then. Is that right? I could have
like a little above County, Westchester, up a little north, but not too far north.
Okay.
Yeah.
So going back to 1974, and so this case, I had always known that this was based on a true story. I myself was not allowed to watch this film. I wasn't in the country when it came out, but when it was on replay on TV in the 80s, I was definitely not allowed. For sneaking it in somehow. Like in the early 90s. So I was only 4 years old in 1979. So and I was in Poland. So, but anyway, going back.
Oh, so you saw it in Poland, or when you came?
No. I saw it in reruns.
Got it. Okay.
When it were because I remember, I don't know if it was USA or there was Up All Night, whenever October. They would play all the old horror movies. That's actually how I saw Halloween for the first time as well.
Right.
So it's kind of like late night TV that was typically always edited too. So that's, of course. But it was always a really creepy one that I saw. I was like, oh my God, this is insane. And this was before we all knew about, boys mass murdering their families. Like that wasn't
Yeah.
really which spoiler alert, this is what the actual case was about. So this family was a little cuckoo, and I didn't realize this at the time when I was like, oh, we should do the Amityville Horror, that this has like everything. This has was it the Gambino family,
Yeah.
which is the
The,
very no, is it the wrong family?
and the Genovese.
And like total mob of New York. Then
Yeah.
also the Warrens, which are the paranormal investigators that there's entire franchise now of horror films based on them.
Yeah.
Which I'm totally forgetting. Which okay, the Conjuring. If
Right. Yeah.
if anybody
Yeah.
of you guys saw that. So Judy
There are quite a few.
and Ed Warren
Yeah.
were involved in this case as well, which
Yeah.
is kind of crazy. So this is like the granddaddy of all of the horror movies outside of Halloween. This is known as like the prototypical, stereotypical horror movie of haunted house. Like this
Yeah,
is
supernatural. Perhaps
yeah,
one
this
of the
is not
first
the haunted
supernatural
house.
movies that really became popular, other than The Exorcist, which I
Yeah, yeah.
just as some side notes, Amityville actually means friendship, which is interesting.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
it was settled and formed Amityville around the 1600s. Annie Oakley, Al Capone during Prohibition, and Will Rogers are some of the more famous people to have lived in Amityville. So I
Oh,
just
that's
want
very
to
cool.
that.
I
Yeah.
did not know that either. So back to kind of the way we usually talk about murders is we can talk about what the crime was as it stands, and then we can go into the family, and then we can go into the craziness that happened afterwards. And this is one of those cases where, for all intents and purposes, he was convicted and tried and spent the rest of his life in jail for been a specific journalist who have called into question the entire case, and we'll get into that as well. So it's very fascinating, actually.
Mhm.
But let's start with the crime itself. So in the early evening hours of November 13th, 1974, there were a bunch of drinkers at Henry's Bar, which was a tavern Merrick Road and Ocean Avenue in Amityville. They were hanging out, sipping beers, having cocktails, and it seemed like it was going to be an uneventful evening. However, at 6:30 p.m., Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr., and that's what he was known to the locals, opened the door to the bar and yelled, quote, "You got to help me. I think my mother and father are shot," end quote. And so obviously this was a small town in the 70s. They all went to help him. So that was Robert Bobby Kelsick. He was an out of work brick mason, and he was Butch's best friend, who actually kind of got everybody going into a car to help them. And he was like, Butch was hysterical, crying, "Bobby, you got to help me. Somebody shot my mother and father."
Yeah. When you all go there, go into the house. He lets all his friends and the people who show up round it up.
But he refuses to go back into the house again.
Right.
And Bobby, who is his best friend, was like, "Are you sure they're not asleep?" And he's like, "No, no, I saw them up there." So the people who went to that house initially were named John Altieri, Joey Yeswoot, I'm probably mispronouncing that, Al Saxton, and William Scordamigli, who was the owner of Henry's Bar. So they piled into a blue Electra 225 1975 car, which I remember the Buicks, they were massive. My parents had one in the 70s, or like in the early 80s when we got here. And so Bobby was the one that actually drove down to the house, which was only a block away
Yeah.
from the bar. And
12 Ocean Avenue. And
112 Ocean Avenue.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. And the house itself was a rambling 3-story Dutch colonial home built in 1925. And the property was long and narrow, and so the house kind of sat sideways with the front door facing the driveway and not the front. And so that's where you always see the eyes, because that's actually the front of the house.
Right,
You
right.
go onto the house on the side. So there was a dog inside barking, and he was tied up in the inside of the kitchen's back door, and he was barking, but everything else was quiet. Strangely enough, the dog was not totally housebroken, so that's where the family typically tied the animal to the kitchen's back door, which I found kind of weird and a little cruel. But
Yeah.
again, this is the 70s. And so kind of hurried up the stairs to the second floor, except for Bobby, who, as you mentioned, stayed outside, and they were immediately overwhelmed with the stench of death and blood.
Mhm.
And what the men found were Ronald Joseph DeFeo Sr., 43, and his wife Louise DeFeo, 42, dead in their bed. Their DeFeo Sr.'s bare back. There was dried blood there. And Louise, it was a little hard to see her body because she was buried underneath an orange blanket. But they were able to kind of see that she was also dead. And unfortunately, again, this is a family homicide. All of Butch's siblings were dead. They were all in their beds. And so that was John DeFeo, age 9. Then Mark DeFeo, age 12. They were in the same room. They were both in the same bed, and they were also shot to death. And then their sister,
8 years old, right? His 8-year-old sister.
Yeah, sister was 8 years old as well. Joe Yeswat was the one who called 911. And
and then Dawn.
Dawn, who was the eldest sister, who was 17. I believe she was 17.
And DeFeo himself, the junior, was 23, I believe.
Right. So it was, so there was where am I? So she was 16 or 17, and then there was another younger sister, and then the 2 boys.
Right. So 6 in total.
Yeah, 6 in total, exactly. So then the investigation kind of went into full swing. The police, what has happened here. And they quickly, Butch's story kept changing, and they decided that he would be kind of the main suspect. At first, he said that it was a hitman, because his family, his father, his mother was the daughter of a
I believe she was the Genovese daughter.
She was she was. Yeah. It wasn't the Genovese. It was her father worked very closely with the Genovese family.
That's right. And that was the connection with black car business.
Yes.
Right? Which we'll get to. Yeah.
Yes. And so when the police showed up after the 911 called, Butch was obviously in shock, and he felt that his family had been targeted by the mob. And he also actually named the potential mob hitman. And pretty quickly, the police found, it was a real hitman, but so he would have not been able to kill the family. So that story wasn't adding up. And then when they brought him in for interrogation, he actually confessed to the truth, that he killed his family, and claimed, this was what his lawyer claimed, that he heard demonic voices in his head that made him do it.
Also, I think one of that he was handed the gun and told to kill the family.
Right. There
right?
was
Like, of
lots
course,
of different stories.
yeah, that's told.
Yes, exactly.
Also, do you know, Dominika, how it went from, because when the 911 calls, that leads to the investigation from the local police, but then from what I understand, uh, the Suffolk police takes over. Do you know anything more about that? Like how patient switches?
You know what? I did not know. I think I feel
Okay.
like I read that, but I didn't because I focused mostly on the all the disparities that happened
Mhm.
in the case
Right on.
in his trial. So that I am not sure about.
Okay.
Um but so he turned they had got their man, especially because it was known that uh he had a pretty rough life, Butch. He was overweight and shy when he was a young kid. He got tormented all the time. He started lashing out in his teen years, and his father was known to be abusive. And they actually, his mom took him to see a psychiatrist to help him out. He was a
Mhm.
heroin addict
Yeah.
and I think also methamphetamines, something. He was also definitely on heroin, but there was something else he was doing. He got kicked out of school due to violence. So it wasn't really a stretch for the police being like, oh, okay, this guy killed his. He
I'll
was
say.
regularly using LSD and heroin.
And did he serve in the military? I have a feeling like there was a bit where he was also part of the military, and that they said that that was one of the reasons why he was apparently good with the gun and desensitized to violence.
Which makes sense. Um, I don't know how the military could have gotten such a. Because
Right.
he been
Unless his pop pulled string. Oh no, you know what? I beg your pardon. He wanted to go. He was drafted or something, and actually, I beg your pardon. Senior spoke to some officials higher up, and they made sure that that Butch would not serve. I
I
think
see.
that's what it was.
Yeah, and again, his
Yeah.
parents did try to like his father started giving Butch to try to like get him to do well in school, and that wasn't working. He refused to attend the psychiatrist appointments. Um, and finally, when he got kicked out of school due to the violence toward other students, his dad got him a job at his dealership and gave him a weekly stipend. Um, even if he was like falling down at the job stipend he used to buy alcohol and drugs and guns. He was also known to get drunk and start fights. And on one occasion, he attempted to attack his father with a shotgun while his parents were arguing.
Yeah. And I
So,
believe it was at that time because his dad was really beating his mother to a pulp. You know, he and I guess a lot gravitated towards their mom because their father just really had a violent temper. And to back it up, it was actually uh, not the war because he didn't go to war. He wasn't involved in the military. But the night of the killing, he was watching a war film that they say just kind of may have even influenced him because that came out during the investigation. That he was
which
just kind
which I actually have a therapist kind of write up during the trial that kind of he said no, actually that movie had nothing to do with him killing
of,
his parents because and we'll get to that. But the interesting thing with this family is that around town they were known as a quote nice normal family. They were very religious, outwardly kind. They would hold a prayer huddle on Sunday morning. So in 1973, installed a statue of Saint Joseph, the patron saint of families and fathers, holding baby Jesus on their front lawn. Which there's pictures online of that if you can see it.
well,
Um,
that's when the father got very, very into hearing voices from God and especially Saint Joseph. Like he would speak to that statue, from what I understand.
which is wait, Butch or the father?
I'm sorry, Saint
Senior.
Yeah.
And around that same time, Butch was actually handing out statuettes of that same saint to his coworkers, telling them, quote, "Nothing can happen to you as long as you wear this," end quote. This was also of Saint Joseph, which I also find interesting that if his wife is the one that's who connected to the mob, I'm shocked that he would be beating her. I mean, granted, it's the 70s, but I would think that his father-in-law would be,
That's
"I'm
right.
giving you a ton of money. If you don't stop beating my daughter, I'm going to kill you."
Yeah.
So I find that interesting, and that's how we'll get later into all the different theories. So one of the reasons why the police believe that Butch killed his father first was that in October 1974, Butch was entrusted by his family's dealership with depositing approximately the bank. But Butch, because he was a crap of a human being, he felt he wasn't earning enough in wages, and he devised a plan with his friend to stage a fake robbery and steal the money for themselves. And of course, his plan fell apart. And when the police arrived at the dealership to question him, he uh, cooperate with the authorities, even though his father knew he had taken the money. And Ronald Sr. interrogated his son about the robbery, and Butch threatened to kill his father during that whole situation. And so that was in October, and then they were dead November the 13th. And supposedly, what the police believe happened was that he took his rifle and he entered his parents' rooms first, where he fatally shot the both of them. And then he went back to his four siblings' rooms and murdered 18-year-old was Dawn. She was 18, 13-year-old Allison, 12-year-old Mark, and 9-year-old John Matthew. And then he actually took a shower afterwards, hid his clothing and gun in a pillowcase, and left for work, ditching the evidence in a storm, which was one of the things about the case when the psychiatrist went on the stand, because he tried to claim insanity because he was hearing voices. But the therapist was like, no, because of the fact that he was able to shower, change, and get rid of his evidence, he knew what he had done was wrong. So that actually really messed up his kind of defense as a quote.
A lot of a lot of this case in the beginning, certainly with the allegations and the talk and some proven facts given. What's the mother's name again? Forgive me.
Louise.
Louise's condition and always wearing sunglasses. That it reminded me of the Menendez brothers. They're this was self-defense of years of abuse and sexual assault towards them as kids growing up. So there was a tinge of me thinking like, oh, like maybe that could have led to it. But to take it beyond your abuser, that's what I don't understand. The minute, they felt their mom was complicit, their father, and that Menendez trial happened. And then now you have this, and years earlier, where I feel it was heightened because there were times when Senior threatened to cut him off financially. He was married at the time, Butch was, and didn't want them to live alone. He said, you have to live in the house. He also was very controlling over them. So perhaps over time, it just sort of built up. Senior was obviously no saint, but he did threaten his own son. He was asked to do a hit, actually, by Senior, and of his grandfather. I mean, we could get all into this later. Maybe I'm jumping ahead, but Butch loved his grandfather, Senior's dad. Everything going on. The idea was that
which grandfather was he wanted to take? Because Michael Brigante Sr. was Louise's father, and he was the one that was connected. He wasn't in the Giovesi family, but he was connected to them. Like he did work with them. So he had connections, and
I mean, Senior had his own ties. Uh, so for whatever reason, it came out something about how we need to. He was asked basically to kill his grandfather, whom Butch was very close to.
Mhm.
And when Butch shows up, he puts the gun on the table and he's like, "My dad just asked me to do this, and I obviously can't do this." So he's happy because he has this great allegiance with his grandson. But it's like, now what do you do? So Senior definitely messed and traumatized his family. You know, I will get into
Yes.
that. Comes up in the trial as part of his
That
defense.
comes out. Yeah. So William Weber was his lawyer. And now he gave a 1992 interview to, I'm not sure who he gave the interview to, but he claimed, this is Butch DeFeo, who's in jail because he did get sentenced. He said that he was advised by his lawyer, William Weber, to make up hearing voices to make the story sound more attractive for future book and movie contracts. And as you remember, that was the 1977 movie, the 1977 book that came out. So in the trial, it came out, there was the defense also said, was it the defense said that it was impossible shooter to have killed the whole family the way that it was done. There was a guy, a journalist, who wrote a book called "The Night That the DeFeos Died," and his name was Rick Osuna. Now, he had been put onto the case earlier by, I think he was working for, no, entries, I think, for A&E or for like one of the channels. And he found a lot of discrepancies in the actual case because there's always been a question of why didn't the kids wake up? He didn't have a silencer. So why didn't the kids wake up to the gunshots? Why did they, how is it a person able to kill so many people so quickly and so neatly? Now, that he had drugged his family, but
Yeah.
when the autopsies came back, there were no drugs found in their system.
But
So,
also, the forensic investigator found that the bodies were most likely moved. So, perhaps the kids were able to get up, murdered, and then their bodies are placed back because everyone's asleep, right? And there's no way that all of that. So the theory is that each member of the family was killed and then their bodies. In fact, Senior's leg is kind of dangling off of the side of the bed.
yeah.
Uh,
Um,
that's
so
another idea. Is that, following the theory that there might have been more than just one shooter. It's
yeah.
possible someone's helping move the bodies. Senior's a big guy. He was shot twice. A lot of them were shot twice. Did the first shot just kind of get him up in the adrenaline? He's going after his son, and then his son shoots him again. And then he's like, I got to get him to bed. He's a huge guy. How did he have help? Or did he have help?
Right. So originally he actually had another lawyer, 1975. Jacob Siegfried was his lawyer, and he motioned the court to be permitted the right to examine, inspect, copy, photograph, or make and take photostatic copies of the original notes of the arresting officers. He felt that the defendant was deprived of a preliminary hearing, and he was really trying to find a way to put like holes in the prosecution's case. Unfortunately, the court didn't deem that these items were necessary for Butch's defense, which I found interesting.
Very
And
interesting.
so Judge John Jones, he denied the request. And then that's when Siegfried filed a notice of defense of mental disease or defect for his client. So it was actually, but strangely enough, Butch did not want his sanity questioned, and he threatened to strangle Siegfried. And that's around the time that Michael Brigante Sr. He had already spent $40,000 on attorneys. He actually said, per this guy Nick Osuna's book, quote, "Sweetheart, your dime is played out," end quote. And he pulled court and he got a court appointed attorney. And this is where William Weber comes in on July 7th, 1975. He was court appointed to Butch, and he was the one that we find out orchestrated the Lutzes moving into the house and having all of this, quote unquote, so they could sell books.
And let's keep in mind the name of the house given by the family was High Hopes.
Right. Right.
So there you go. High Hopes.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Lutzes move in.
And they they claim it's haunted. And I think they managed to stay like 7 months there, and then they strangely get a book deal. And this is where the Warrens come in. The Warrens like come into the house and see if they can talk to the entities, which they believe are the murdered kids. And then the book gets written. So
also, from what I understand, the Lutzes financial position to buy the house when was on the market for half its price, right?
Right.
But apparently they didn't even have they weren't in a financial situation to even get a loan. So that's always been a weird, interesting. Like how were they able to move in? And then the question remains: did Weber help? Did they get help from the publisher?
I actually have the answer to that. So,
right.
And this is from that William Weber sent a book contract to the Lutzes saying that he had created a corporation and Kathy and George Lutz would receive 12% of the shares of this corporation when this book was going to be written.
Wow.
And so,
wow.
So they, however, just 12%, they wanted 50%. And so the Lutzes were the ones who picked the author, Jay Anson, of the book. And they got a lucrative 50-50 split. And then
so that's how they for the mortgage and they're able to buy the house.
Yeah, they said that there was also that were written in the New York Sunday News and Good Housekeeping, and they were based on the experiences that Lutzes, Weber, and Hoffman brainstormed in January 1976. So Hoffman, who was the original writer on this, before they went with Jay Anson, he was the one who wrote those articles. So suit against him. And they got, did they actually win? They actually went for $4.5 million against Hoffman because he had written those articles. And meanwhile, they were working with Jay Anson on the actual book. That was dismissed, but they did get money from the book because it did very well. And there was lots of lawsuits for people trying to essentially profit off of them. And it came like they actually said that most of the book was a work of fiction, and it relied on large part upon the suggestion who was the attorney. But
then, did they move in only 28 days after the murder? Did you find that out?
I'm not sure.
Or did they sell the house after 28 days of being in there? I know there's a number 28, but I can't recall if that relates to them.
Yes, they moved in 13 months after the DeFeo murders had occurred. So
okay.
On December 18th, 1975.
Okay.
Now,
Okay.
so they in the book, they claimed that they had a priest come in to bless the home, to essentially exorcism, but he came to sprinkle the water, and then he supposedly heard the ghost himself. Um and then there was, from the book, they claimed they felt strange sensations. um So supposedly in the book, they felt that in the book that the couple started beating their children, that they became very violent with their kids. And so they claimed that the house was doing it. And so they lived in, I think they lived in the house for 28 days.
That's what, yeah, okay. Yeah.
And then they
It's like
moved out.
goop and black stuff, right? Like dripping from the walls,
Yeah,
weird
yeah.
faces outside the window.
So just, yeah, exactly. So the family actually went on a nationwide tour to promote the book as their true story. And I believe they had, because they had 50% of the profits from the book. I don't know how much money they got from that $80 million, but everybody made quite a bit of money on this. But going back to the actual trial. So in the book Horrific Homicides, a judge looks back at the Amityville horror murders by Thomas M. Stark. The prosecution had brought in a psychologist by the name of Dr. Harold Zolan, and he interviewed Butch DeFeo for 5 hours and concluded, like we talked about, that he was in his right mind when he killed his family. And he actually diagnosed with Butch DeFeo with antisocial personality, and that he claimed that he knew the killings were wrong and he tried to hide the evidence, like we spoke about. And when Zolan, said he spent the 5 hours with DeFeo, he noticed that he had all the common characteristics of antisocial personality disorder. So they include low frustration level, easily aroused, frequent explosive frequent explosive conduct, a desire to get his own way, fitting into the norms of society. He had little capacity to feel guilt, self centered and having disregard for the feelings of others, self gratification in his conduct, and he really wanted to be the big man and had like a macho attitude.
Which is
And
all probably inherent. I mean, that's nurture, right? If you're surrounded in this mafioso world where, you have members of your family that are like bit players in that, just like shady behavior, you bear witness to a domestic abuse. I mean, it's got to stem a lot from that and how to deal with life, like the
you're right.
trauma.
Yeah, exactly. And he believed that because this personality and his rebellion against his demanding father, that
Yeah.
was the cause of the shooting. He also didn't believe that the movie Castle Keep had anything to do with the shootings, and that was the movie that before he killed,
Okay.
um,
Yeah.
before he killed the thing. So now, Rick Osuna's book comes out, and he actually felt that he did a lot of investigation. His book, as I said again, was called "The Night That the Feos Died,"
Mhm.
and he felt there was okay. So there was a question at one point during the trial. Butch sister was the one that killed their siblings. So he essentially said that Dawn, she wanted to escape to Florida with her boyfriend, and her parents were like, absolutely not. So she was the one that came up to Butch and said, I know you hate dad. I don't like them either. I want to go run off with my boyfriend. Let's kill our parents.
Let's do it. Let's do
And
this.
so said yes, we're going to kill the parents. And then so he kills the parents, and then he comes to the other rooms, and he has found that Dawn has killed their siblings because she didn't want any witnesses, and he's so horrified by the fact that she killed these young kids that he kills her.
Yeah.
So that was one of the defenses that he kind of, again, he kept his stories. So that was one of the things for doubt that they were trying to do.
Right. And
Um,
self defense being another thing. But
and
again, going back to the bodies being moved, So if you do follow that theory, and she is standing up and they're arguing, uh, she's not killed in bed sleeping. Her head is
Right.
not on a pillow. So, but that's again, if we follow that as what actually.
And now the other thing is that there was also
And his
supposed
pals were there.
yeah, that his pals were there and that they were in some place that they were in some way also responsible. But there was I mean, if you want to read the book, it's fascinating. There was a they had gotten I think I don't know if it was defense had
Mhm.
brought in an investigator from New York City to look at the crime scene, and he was adamant that there was no way that there was only one gun used and that there was
Mhm.
only one shooter.
Mhm.
He felt that there had to be at least three.
Oh wow, wow.
But again, like in the end, Butch was convicted of first degree murder. He died in jail. He stayed in he, as I said, claimed that all of the money for the book and everything was all Weber.
Mhm.
And that Weber was the one that told him to, like we said earlier, that he heard voices. Um,
I
and
mean, is as a on a personal level, do you feel that this could have led to a mistrial?
I mean,
Like, you
yeah,
know,
there was enough evidence.
but just like a conflict of interest in legal counsel.
Right. Well, his book, Rick Osona's book was said that in the crime scene, because he was able to get crime scene photos, that the blood stains were in places that did not add up with the story that the DeFeos were all killed in their beds, like you were talking about, which
Right.
and then there was a bullet with a different caliber from the Marlin rifle in
Yes.
the marital bedroom. Um, there was also a lot of police brutality in Suffolk County. And again, this is the 70s. So he feels that Rick Osuna claimed that Butch's confession was obtained under torture.
Because they
Um,
beat him. They beat him
yeah,
really
because
bad.
um,
Yeah.
and then, the prosecutor and the police also admitted on several occasions that the crime would have required three people. Oh, and the retired police detective was named Herman Race, and he reached the same conclusion. But everybody wanted swift justice, and they're like, dude, you were the one that did it. And because he had changed the story so many times,
Mm.
they did him.
You know,
Uh,
they say that that evening, earlier in the evening, uh, I guess perhaps before bedtime, although no one went to bed, that senior really beat the whole family that night.
yeah,
Uh, he was really, he made threats towards Dawn's boyfriend. Uh, and at one point, she even takes a kitchen knife and takes it out of her hands. They continue to fight. Butch is watching. The wife is completely beat down. And he got really upset with her because they had such a close relationship. And he felt that she was just basically so complicit to a point that she was beat to a pulp. And then when Butch pushed him over, she runs over to him to make sure he. Butch sees that and just has such a bad reaction. Like, how can my mom check on him, make sure that he's all right? So there was a lot of turmoil the evening of the 13th.
yeah. No, and to be fair, in the book, he is not it's not supposed to be a mouthpiece for Butch at all. Like the author says that he's he there's discredited quotes,
Sure.
like, so it's not like Butch could potentially have done it. It was just that he felt that there were so many issues with the trial, like, did other people get away with murdering this family, was was his thing. And uh his version, I'm like looking for that now. uh
As an investigative journalist who dug deep, I mean,
yeah, exactly.
come up with this.
um
And they apparently told him, and I believe Butch said himself, that he felt safer in jail. Like he was
Right.
fine sleeping on the cot. Like everyone was like, "Great, this is the
Yeah.
right place for you
Oh,
to be."
so Rick Osuna's version of events was that the
Hmm.
friend Bobby Kelsky, which he found in the bar, him killed Ronald and Louise, and Dawn was the one who killed the children,
Hmm.
and then Butch was so horrified that he killed Dawn. So that's the author's kind of his idea of what happened. Obviously, Butch went to prison for this, so he was the one who was found guilty of all of these murders. And then again, Weber so Lorraine and Ed Warren actually did a séance in the house.
Hmm. And they
The
weren't alone. There were a lot of different mediums and ghost speakers, or however you call it, supernatural hunters that were there. And there were film crews. Like everyone was surrounded. It was a scene.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it's like I can't imagine the horror of an entire family killed, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden you have all of the craziness of the supernatural, and now it's a haunted house. I mean, that's just catnip for people. So so that is the harrowing, horrifying case of the DeFeo family, and then how, one of the most famous horror movies of all time out from the lawyer and a family who were kind of ready to cash in. And I guess there was also a priest that was actually defrocked by his diocese for participating in this whole thing as well.
Oh, interesting. Well,
Yeah.
I'm blanking on this fellow's name. I've been deep diving as you have. In our styles, you tend to go more for the print and the reading, and I'm watching in docs. They do mention that there was, in addition to all that body moving, they felt that he kept claiming his innocence, which may point to like this sort of outer body experience. And I think that was the gateway and the springboard for all this. The house is haunted. I had some mental issues. But if this guy has mental issues, obviously prior to, and he did, obviously, sociopath, and that was read and you know, packaged as him being haunted and the house being haunted. And
You're
that's what
right.
I find so interesting. And uh, it's just the magic of Hollywood, just taking over these. I just can't believe a legal would arrange such a thing. And in the documentary, they show a scene with the Lutzes sitting down at a table with Weber, drinking wine, discussing
Mm,
how this book will be great. It's important for people to know this. But yeah,
yeah.
the Warrens go in there, these folks go in there, and it just doesn't feel
And you have a
genuine.
franchise and you have a franchise born, which
Yeah.
I was just reading an article in 2022, so that's last year, straight to DVD releases based on the Amityville case. Amityville Uprising, Amityville Bigfoot, and Amityville Karen were supposed to have been released last year. So
Mhm.
the franchise is still going. Butch DeFeo died in prison. George Lutz is dead as well, and people are still going of Ocean Avenue. I mean, there's been lots of families that have lived there since with no paranormal activity.
They
But
do claim that Bobby, the pal, that was in the playroom or wherever they
oh
were.
yeah,
Is that his name? His friend Bobby, that they felt.
Bobby Kleski.
So he just sort of jet, and no one knew where he was, and it's believed that he moved.
Hmm.
And someone who's friends in with he and that whole group recognized him on the street and was like, Bobby. And he was like, I'm sorry, I think you had me confused for someone else, and just continued walking, but it was him,
Mm,
by all accounts.
interesting.
So
Yeah.
he really distanced himself, and it makes you wonder, like, what
Uh,
did he play a role in this?
yeah, exactly. I hope I'm pronouncing his name. I'm probably not pronouncing his name right. But the book itself kind of, I mean, he interviewed everybody at the time and got lots of records. And so I kind of wonder, like, was he Rikosuna? Like, was he right that it was an affair of three people who did this and
Hmm.
not just him? And it's interesting. We didn't even mention Geraldine DeFeo, who was the ex-wife of Butch, but there was a question about when they actually got married. Did they get married in the 70s, like Butch claimed, or did they actually get married in the early 80s? And so there's been lots of questions about that as well. So yeah, go ahead.
He was senior was, again, we really, the listeners, I think, should really know him for the background of all this, the kind of guy that DeFeo Sr. really was. He was physically very big, commanded the room, and just spoke to tons of different people. And he just had so many ties and would sneak out money for this and that. The Cadillac business was doing well, but then the mafia said, "Hey, this place is getting too hot. Take over this dealership." So he felt like the man, and I think consequently so did young Butch. Like, this is kind of cool, and my grandfather is in on this, and my wife's father is in on this. So I feel this whole grander than thou. Uh, and that's all before he's 23 years old when this happens. So you got to imagine everything that's around him in this weird community of, I mean, it's when the mob was really in New York, especially, just like at its height. And, to be involved in that and being asked to kill your own grandfather by your dad, this is no justification or anything for what happened, but clearly a case where he should have taken his meds. He should have perhaps, as with all these cases we discussed, could have got a little more help. But so, what do you think? Do you think
I
he
have
got assistance?
Before we go to that, I actually totally forgot. I found on very interesting facts that came out from the book that he actually he figured out that they were lies, that they were myths. So one of the myths in the book was that the Shinecock Indians resided in Amityville, and they actually did not reside anywhere near Amityville, because the Long Island Indians were the Montauk Nation. So that was, yeah, that 112 Ocean Avenue was an Indian sanitarium where the mad and dying would be left exposed to the elements to die. That there's actually no record that there was ever an Indian burial ground or a sanitarium on Ocean Avenue. And Rick spoke to a Long Island Native American expert, John Strong, saying that the Indian groups lived along the tidal bays, and that, so I think Long Island.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, and Suffolk County is on Long Island.
Yeah.
It's interesting too because were all these rumors started by those believing that the house is haunted? And what I was going to point out earlier was, and maybe you know this fellow's name, but there was a guy out there who just disproved everyone's supernatural abilities and mediums. In fact, the Warrens, I believe he was on a show where this is I can bend a spoon. No, you can't. So can I. So he was one of these people who were like, this place is not haunted. This place isn't haunted. This was a terrible tragedy that happened. There's no explanation for it.
Right.
And at first, everyone was like, "Ooh, the Warrens are there. Ooh, they're trying to exercise the place." But then they realized, yeah, this is kind of a hoax, and that became a huge item in the news. That kind of took over the news cycle. The fact that this book is actually it's false, and it's been proven false.
Yeah. So another thing in the book, the original Amityville Horror book, a witch named John Ketchum escaped from Salem, Massachusetts during the witch trials and built his house on or near the famous Amityville house to continue his devil worship. and that it was reported that his body was property of 112 Ocean Avenue. And so there was a citizen named John Ketchum that lived in Ipswich, Massachusetts, and he settled in Huntington Township on Long Island. But he was a representative of the local government and was not a witch, and was actually a rather prominent figure in Huntington until his death in 1697. So there's never any information of him being a witch. Another claim in the book that the famed Amityville house resides on an ancient cemetery that was abandoned or cursed. And that is also false. There was never a report or indication of any cemetery near that property. And the owners of the original house at 112 Ocean Avenue had to move their house down the street because they were plagued with supernatural problems. That was John Moynihan purchased the property at 112 Ocean Avenue from Annie Ireland in 1924. They needed a bigger home because they grew in size. And so they moved their small cottage down a matter of a couple hundred yards and lived there until the construction was completed. So that was not true. And then there was also the Red Room was the gateway to hell. And the Red Room was actually nothing more than a little area underneath a stairwell. Children stored their toys or used as storage. It no longer exists because the current owner renovated the basement and constructed over it. And so that was never a thing. And they claimed that the Amityville horror movie could not be filmed in the real house because the crew was too scared. And actually, the village of Amityville viewed the ghost story as a hoax and refused to allow the film crew to film in their community. So they denied shooting permits there.
Interesting.
And then also in the book, Kathy Lutz has 3 dreams in the Amityville Horror about Louise DeFeo. First, that Kathy Lutz wakes up screaming because she saw that Mrs. DeFeo died of a gunshot wound to the head. She was shot in the head, Kathy screamed. The second dream consisted of Mrs. DeFeo plot at St. Charles Cemetery and re-entombed in Brooklyn. And then the last dream consisted of Mrs. DeFeo making love to the painter of the DeFeo portraits. So first, Mrs. DeFeo died from 2 gunshots to the upper body. And it was nowhere near her head or neck. Second, the Brigantes never moved Mrs. DeFeo's body from the family plot because they wanted Louise with her children. And that was and there was never any affair. So those were the myths.
Yeah, he was really upset with he was paranoid, Senior was, that she was having an affair. Also interesting to point out, you mentioned the burial grounds and the sacred Native American Indian grounds buried with poltergeist.
Right, exactly. I was thinking of the same thing. So
also one other note is that Louise was when found murdered was clutching onto a heart necklace that she had, which at one point she started wearing in place of her cross, which I believe could really kind of upset Senior because they went to church. She said, "I'm not wearing this. I'm just going to wear the heart from now on." So I saw one of those horrible pictures in her body. She's clutching onto the heart.
That is amazing. So you guys watch, if you haven't seen it before, watch the Amityville Horror or any of its sequels. And next week we will have another very fun, true story. Not very fun, but interesting.
Fun for us.
Yeah, Halloween type with a true story. So thanks for listening.
Wait. Dominika, what do you think?
Oh, what do I think?
Was it demons? Did he act alone? Did he have help?
Definitely not demons. I'm thinking he, I don't know. I mean, this journalist, the fact that a detective said it couldn't have, I kind of wonder about that. But I'm not sure. I don't know. What do you
think? Agree that there was at least one other person. There's no way these bodies all could have been moved
so quickly. Well, and especially
person.
when you talk about Bobby Kleski and how he disappeared. I mean, that's definitely
Yeah,
that makes me think that there's something going on with that.
like he
Um,
wasn't killed,
yeah,
which I find interesting, you know?
yeah. All
So,
right. Well, happy October, best month of the year, and we will see you next week. Thanks. Why can I not find how to stop recording? Oh, there it is. Stop.
bloop.